to start with a developing story on Parliament Hill this hour. The Liberals say they'll be supporting an opposition motion to expand the scope of the foreign interference inquiry after last week's stunning report that alleged some parliamentarians are, quote, wittingly helping foreign states. The motion is being debated today with a vote in the House of Commons expected tomorrow. And in just over an hour, a Senate committee is going to hear from some of the MPs who authored that report. With more now, I'm joined by Steve Chase, who's a senior parliamentary reporter with the Globe and Mail. He's been following this story very closely, breaking most of them. Dan Stanton is also here. He's a former CSIS executive manager. And Wesley Wark is with us. He's a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. Both Professor Wark and Mr. Stanton just testified before that same committee. We're set to see the NSICOP parliamentarians testify in front of in just about over an hour's time. Hi, everybody. Good to see you. Thanks for making the time. Steve, I'll start with you. The government is supporting essentially this motion now to turn things over to the foreign interference inquiry. The first question I had when I was listening to it was like, the timeline's already pretty tight on this thing. I'm not sure, like, what difference does this make in actually investigating the intelligence? Can Justice Ogg actually say, you know, this is right, this is wrong, there's proof of this, there isn't proof of that?
That's a good question. We don't have an answer yet. We've asked the Foreign Interference Commission to comment. They said they'll wait until the vote takes place tomorrow. One of the things that is important, I think, is not only for the Commission to get access to the information, which was the basis of these findings last week, but also that there's some kind of investigative process. Do these alleged parliamentarians appear before the committee or the Commission in private? Do they defend themselves and so on? So, yeah, it's going to take some more time. I think that in some ways this is a benefit for all parties to punt the issue, because I think there was uncomfortable questions for everybody starting to surface. And so I think in some ways, I think it's the best possible solution for any party leader who doesn't want to face questions about why they aren't taking action in their caucus.
It may be a politically convenient and helpful solution, as Steve outlines, Mr. Stanton, but is it the way to get at the answer, I guess, is the question. And for Canadians, like if the question is, did these people collude with foreign states? Who are they? Like, do you see the inquiry as a venue to find that information?
No, not at all. As with the RCMP, the deflection to the RCMP, now we're hearing the deflection to the inquiry. The parameters of the inquiry are not wide enough to cover this. We have one former MP who may have worked and collaborated with a foreign intelligence service. That potentially could be espionage. That's not part of the ambit of the inquiry. So the government kind of owns this mess, and I feel the government should deal with it. They need to come up with a strategy to deal with it. We need to have political leaders indoctrinated, cleared, reading the reports, and then deal with it that way, not deflecting it to these other entities.
Professor Wark, what's your sense of what the best venue to kind of get the answers Canadians are looking for might actually be in this case? Is it just through the political parties? Is there law enforcement involved? Like, what does it look like from where you sit?
Well, Vassie, I think part of the question is what are people actually expecting might come out of this block motion that would ask the Foreign Interference Commission to investigate further some of the findings from the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. I would say about that a couple of things. One is I don't think we should expect that the Foreign Interference Commission can go any further than the NSICOP report did in terms of naming names. We won't hear names coming out of the Foreign Interference Commission, and I think actually that's a good thing. We might get more contextual detail from an investigation conducted by Commissioner Hogan. I would say in response to Dan's comment that the Commission may get some new marching orders that it may be prepared to accept coming out of the block motion to be voted on tomorrow. So I wouldn't be surprised if their mandate is expanded in this direction, and they may need more time to do that investigation. But we won't see more names, we won't see names, and we won't see more details of the intelligence reports themselves on which the NSICOP committee based its findings. The Foreign Interference Commission is working under the same kinds of constraints as NSICOP worked under in terms of the need to protect secrets. But I think there could be some value in more context about the nature of these allegations. Over what period of time did they take place? How strong in general is the intelligence that supports these allegations? Which foreign countries might have been involved? Some of those details, I think, could well be presented. I also think the government could have decided to do that themselves. But, as your guest suggests, this has been punted over to the commission.
I wonder also that if it does sort of insulate political parties, Steve, for a little while, how long that lasts. Because ultimately, I think they will continue getting questions. If you have so-called foreign agents in your midst, like, aren't you required to do something about it? To your point, there are hard questions for every party. I mean, right now, the Greens and the NDP are willing to take a briefing. The Conservatives are not. The Liberals are unwilling to disclose anything about what they've done as a party as well.
I think that the party leaders should go ahead and get the briefing still. This doesn't preclude them. And in fact, let's keep in mind that Mr. Trudeau has access to all the information. So if there's anybody in his caucus or in candidates, he knows those names already and he can deal with them. And the same goes for the other parties. So I don't think this precludes the party leaders going ahead and asking for those security briefings that would reveal what the NCCOP knows.
Nobody really seems to want to do that, though, Dan, Mr. Stanton, because, I mean, they've put forward reasons which are essentially, if I get that information, in the Conservatives' case, I can't act on it. Again, for the Liberals, I've done the same line of questioning for them. It's opaque. Like, I can't ascertain from the way that they've answered my questions whether or not they actually have done any look inside their own caucus, whether they're prepared to act on it, whether they feel it meets an evidentiary bar. Understandably, it is just an accusation at this point, but I don't know if they've done anything more to find out.
No.
What else?
And it remains politicized. And it's interesting because we have unity now on Bill C-70. We have the opposition engaged and supportive in these legislative changes, which are going to, in many ways, prevent this type of activity. So in a way, you almost wish Parliament would sort of maintain that spirit and sort of put down the partisan line on this and get the briefings, and at least they'll know what's going on in their parties. Because all we're going to get now is we're going to get rumors, we're going to get leaks, we're going to get conspiracy theories, and this has to be sorted out with expediency.
At the same time, Professor Work, I imagine if they were to find out and then all of a sudden we see 4 MPs kicked out of caucus, the world, the Canadians and the media and everyone will assume a causal relationship there. I think it's fair to say.
That may well be the outcome, Vasi. But I think, to be honest, many of the political parties are probably still in a bit of a state of shock about the findings of the NCCOP report. And if the leaders of those parties do get the security briefings, and I'm absolutely in agreement with Steve that I think it's incumbent on Mr. Poilievre to take that briefing on behalf of the Conservatives so that they have an understanding based on the classified intelligence about the nature of these allegations and whether any of them touch any of their current or past caucus members. They can then decide, what they want to do about that. But that's down the road. I think that's the first step. And the other thing I think it's very important not to forget is that there is an important role for the RCMP to play here. I don't think it's a matter of deflection. The RCMP is our national security law enforcement agency. It's that agency that we really need to look to pursue investigations. In fact, tell us a bit more about those investigations. The RCMP is way too close-lipped about that. Pursue them, see if charges are going to be laid. And, if names are going to be named, it should happen in a court of law.
To Professor Work's point, I think what would have gone a long way, Steve, to sort of direct the conversation is if in that initial stage, the RCMP had come back and said, we are conducting investigations. Instead, what they said is, broadly speaking, we are investigating this issue. We will not comment on whether or not we're investigating any number of parliamentarians or this issue more specifically. And what's more, what they did say was, we knew some of the stuff in this report, but we didn't know everything. And if you go through the report, which I'm sure you have, some stuff it says it was referred to the RCMP, but some stuff says the RCMP wasn't made aware of this intelligence. So again, I'm kind of left with a sense of opaqueness about what actually is law enforcement able to investigate at this point?
Yeah, and we have this long-standing problem, as has probably been discussed many times before on the show, of how we don't have a process to collect evidence from intelligence that meets the standard necessary for prosecution. So what was interesting about the report, however, was the RCMP seemed very positive about the NCCOP report. They effectively endorsed it. So you sensed that statement from the RCMP last week that you got was, I think, the longest statement I've ever seen.
That's true. Good
from
point.
The RCMP, yeah. Which is generally shy about commenting on hotly debated issues on Parliament Hill. So they were basically clapping So that was remarkable.
They certainly took part, Mr. Stanton, in the process that NSICOP, NSICOP spent months, right, in investigating this issue. 33,000 pages of documents, I think something to that nature, that they looked through, and then they conducted tons of interviews, including with members of the RCMP. Do you anticipate, Mr. Stanton, that we will hear more from the law enforcement side at some point?
I don't think so, Vashi. And, all due respect, I think, my colleagues, a lot of this foreign interference activity does not lend itself to criminality. I worked this for many years. I had a long time in counterintelligence. And with a few exceptions, perhaps one case, a lot of it is not meeting a threshold of criminality. And because most intelligence work isn't directed towards...
What does that mean in layman's terms? Like they're doing things that aren't
It means what
illegal?
Type of influence, wittingly cooperating with a foreign state to influence. There isn't really, until this legislation comes through, a hammer to hit people with. So it's not like the Anti-Terrorism Act. It's not like SOIA with respect to espionage and leaking. There isn't anything that's going to get law enforcement motivated on this. I mean, all due respect to the RCMP, I don't think a lot of these files are ones they're going to be able to prosecute. And as far as the intelligence to evidence, if I may, a lot of that's being exaggerated. Intelligence isn't a showstopper in prosecutions. You only have to have a little bit of it. And in some cases, you don't need any of it. But what's happened since 9/11 is the RCMP has gotten used to getting intelligence leads, whether it's from CSIS or third parties. But there's nothing stopping them from prosecuting on their own. That said, if one or two of those cases does meet a criminal threshold.
Professor Work, I'll give the last word to you. If I'm sort of implying from your comments so far, I think you think it'll be a while, if at all, before any names come out, whatever means that ends up happening.
I think that's probably the reality, Vasi, and I don't regret that. I think we have to be very careful in a democracy about naming names in the public square. That really is pretty redolent of McCarthyism and Senator Joe McCarthy's. I have 304 names of known communists in the State Department and so on and so forth. We have to be very, very careful about that in a democracy and follow the rule of law. I would say, with all due respect to Dan's experience on this file, we do have criminal sanctions available, have been available for some time in terms of both the Security of Information Act and the treason offenses in the criminal code that could have been used. I think the problem for the RCMP is that it is a vastly overstretched agency. It doesn't have the resources that it needs to conduct complex foreign interference investigations. And perhaps to Steve's point, part of the reason why they were clapping about the report is it was calling attention to the fact that they don't have the resources, and maybe they hope in these straitened circumstances they'll get some from that report.
Well, good luck to them. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the discussion and your analysis tonight. Steve Chase with the Globe and Mail, Dan Stanton, and Wesley Work.